Senator Kaine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ranking Member Inhofe. I want to ask some questions about the expansion of control of Afghanistan by Taliban over time. In January of 2017, U.S. forces in Afghanistan were about 10,000, and then there were NATO forces, coalition forces too. The Afghan government was estimated by the DoD to be in control of 63% of the districts in Afghanistan in 2017. 1 year later, we had 8,600 troops, so we were down a bit. A BBC fairly intensive study suggested that the government was only in control of 30% of Afghanistan. And that matches something. There was a Special Inspector General report in 2018 just talking about historically, the number of districts controlled or influenced by the government has been following since Seagar been reporting on it, while the number controlled or influenced by insurgents has been rising. President Trump took the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan down to about 2,500 when he left office, and it was sort of at that level when President Biden announced in April that we would leave by September. Do you know in April of 2021 what percentage of the country was controlled by the Afghan government, and what percent was either controlled by the Taliban or the Taliban were operating basically freely?
Senator, I'm kicking myself because my colleague has those statistics and he tracked that very granularly every month, and I wish I had them in front of you to answer you. Maybe I can follow up with a specific answer. But the issue is it was dire. I mean, the number of districts that were controlled by the Afghan government had already slipped. They were basically priming the pump for this final offensive on May 1st. They had already, the way I described it, they had tied the nooses around all these provincial capitals, and they were waiting for May 1st to start to pull them.
Yep.
So that's...
And Dr. Nasser, do you have any additional on that? In April, what percentage of Afghanistan was controlled by the Afghan government?
Based on what I've heard, about 60 to 70% of the country was under Taliban control. But there was a gray area in which they had great presence, if not total control.
Right. So there would be a shrinking percent, dramatically shrinking percent was in government control. A dramatically growing percent was in Taliban control. And then there was this gray area where maybe neither was in control, but the Taliban were operating significantly. So here's my question. If a force of 8,600 back in 2018 could only provide support to ensure government control of 30% of the country, what could we expect long-term from maintaining 2,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan? I mean, weren't we just going to see, just a tiny fraction of the government, of the nation being controlled by the government if the U.S. had 2,500 troops there?
I think it's obvious that 2,500 was not going to turn the war around at all. I think what 2,500 would have done is it would have probably prevented the final collapse. That's the one thing it would not have liberated all the territory under Taliban control. It would not. The Taliban probably, in my estimation, would have still taken some of the provincial capitals, maybe a number of them, even with 2,500 there. However, the only benefit I would see the 2,500 is, and I think Senator Inhofe was right about this, he wrote an op-ed in which he suggested that we use, at least keep a presence to test whether the Taliban has any intention of actually sticking to anything in the Doha Agreement, and that would have been a little bit better than just not testing them at all. That's what I would say. But it definitely was not, believe me, I'm not advocating for any kind of long-term 2,500 presence.
What would the U.S. troop strength have needed to be to enable the Afghan government to control Afghanistan and not the Taliban? Or is there no such number? Would infinity still have not been sufficient?
Senator, I don't want to sound flippant, but when it comes to counterfactuals on Afghanistan now, I often feel like it's sort of like saying, if I were a horse with a horn and wings, I'd be a unicorn, because at this point, I don't know what the counterfactual is that would have worked.
But I mean, you studied this and written about it for 20 years. So if the U.S. had 100,000, if we put 100,000 troops in, would the Afghan government have controlled the nation or not?
Well, they would have controlled much more of it, sure. I mean, not all of it, no.
Yeah, even with 100,000, they could.
They wouldn't have. When we had 100,000 in country, they didn't control all of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kaine.